Hello, everybody. It's Sable. I'm your host. Welcome back to the Full Out Healing Podcast. I cannot believe it is 100 Days of Truth, day 22, and this is episode 17. Now, this episode is an unboxable one, which means it's not going to follow the same structure of past, present, future. Even though I am kind of going through a timeline here, but it's just a little bit more fluid, hence unboxable. So the title of this episode is Unboxable: Hiding as Shame, Surviving Safety, and Self-Suppression. Now, number one, that alliteration is awesome. But on a more serious note, I really wanted to talk about this because my relationship to hiding and being visible versus invisible, and even to the point of doing this show, has really transformed a lot over time. And I noticed that there are just ways I've judged myself for it, but even more importantly, in talking to, connecting with other people in various parts of their own life journey, even as survivors, I just noticed and I think it's more symptomatic of society too, right? We focus on like someone at the destination or I'll speak for myself. It's been so easy for me to look at someone at their destination without any consideration of the journey that took them there. And so mine, I guess this is kind of meta because I'm talking about my own journey about being seen versus invisible and that on this show. And so I'm just going to get into it. So I first want to start talking about my journey with this as a child. As a child, I felt really invisible. And honestly, even though I had a deep longing and a deep desire to feel seen, I also, being invisible also made me feel safe. I experienced some, I was gonna say light bullying. I don't know what that means. But I experienced some bullying growing up, and it was about the things other kids called out about me were things that I felt insecure about. I felt insecure about my height, about the size of my feet. I felt insecure about my hair and also my skin. And so when I sit and think about that, it's a unique pain to be called out and made fun of something that I already felt not good about. And so, which actually, that reminds me of an episode I already did called I Didn't Know, it was something about humor at my expense being just cruelty. Check it out if you relate. But it just made me feel awful, and I found that pain, I just wanted to avoid it, and being invisible felt like the only accessible pathway out to me at the time as a child to avoiding that type of pain, right? Also, just growing up in New York City, being invisible I also experienced that as safety, especially when I started to experience catcalling. Catcalling in New York City, I know it exists all over the world, but in New York City, it's its own special brand. And it's just this level of aggression that I know for me, it used to make me question my physical safety, but then question myself for questioning my safety and thinking, wow, I'm just imagining all of these things, but actually not being able to get over the unease of it all. And then also feeling torn about, is there something feeling like there's nothing I can do to prevent it from happening, right? Like as if It for me, catcalling and aggressive sexual advances, I started experiencing that when I was in the fucking 4th grade. Okay. And I have this clear memory. I was standing in front of my building, and this like old Albanian guy like approached me and basically was asking how much. And I didn't fully understand what was happening, but I knew I didn't feel good. I knew I didn't feel safe, and something about it made me feel dirty and gross. And I wanted to avoid that feeling. And at the time, the only way I perceived a way out of that was for hiding, and that experience affected me so much that I literally stopped wearing shorts until I got to undergrad, because I went to a small liberal arts school. It was like a semi-open but kind of enclosed campus in its own community. And I remember putting on shorts for the first time, wearing shorts outside for the first time in probably over 10 years. I was like 18, and I remember standing outside and feeling the wind on my legs, and I could not believe that I had been missing out on this feeling for so long. And in that moment, I decided, you know what? I don't give a fuck. I'm wearing shorts because it's hot and the wind feels good on my legs. But that's just I thought that, what I wore would help me be more invisible, which, it wasn't true. The catcalling didn't stop after I stopped wearing shorts. It continued. And also, I experienced invisibility as safety because when I did sort of stand up and say what I think, and even, I almost feel a hint of nostalgia thinking about this, where me as a child, I look back on I'm astonished to think there was a time where I was unafraid to say what I thought and what I felt and what I perceived. And it honestly was because I didn't know to be afraid, that there was anything to be afraid of. Like, I just was like, this is what I see. This is what it is. And I really, only after really receiving really deep sort of like criticism, and I say deep because they were it wasn't just criticism, it was like character attacks. Like, I'm this type of a person because I say certain things. I wanted to avoid that. It what felt like a core wound, because I didn't want that to be who I was, right? So at the time I thought that, man, what can make me to avoid that feeling and to find some safety meant being invisible, and being invisible with my voice, right? So that's where, as a child, I really experienced this weird paradox and duality of, I just felt I wanted to feel and be seen so badly, and yet there were scary things that I experienced and wanted to avoid, and found that, being invisible helped me feel safer. Or I don't think it helped me feel safer. It helped me avoid a reiteration of a reoccurrence of whatever the harmful thing was, right? And what's astonishing is I look back on my life and I see this is really the beginning of, that whole battle between perception versus reality. I look back on it now and I'm like, damn, I was always like a truth speaker, like a truth seer. But the meaning I made of people's reactions to that, I internalized it to be something else. That was my perception. It didn't change the reality of that truth and that power I had. And it didn't change that from being expressed, but it changed how I related to it and what I tried to do with it. So then, as sort of like a young burgeoning adult, I really remember like college years, like late teens, early 20s. I felt indivisible because I felt undesirable. I just remember I went to a really small liberal arts school, and there was really like a singular party scene and like a very small like dating pool, and I just felt so like outside of desirability. I also felt invisible, like in the world. I felt invisible as a queer person. I felt like no one knew I was queer, and it felt like this big sort of heavy cloud I had to carry around, and I just felt so invisible as a queer person, and I felt as a result disconnected from queer people and queer community, and felt like, oh my gosh, how will I ever be seen or have even the chance to be desired because I'm an invisible queer person. And then I also felt really like, I don't know if invisible is the right word, but I just felt so outside of femininity because of my height. And I at the time, and it's probably because of the insecurities I grew up with, and that sort of framed the information I received in the world. But at the time, I really just saw space for femininity for people with bodies that were like small and dainty, and and I at the time I only saw the femininity of people with those types of bodies like being respected or admired or held or cared for if they were small. And so all of those things, it's interesting, these different, I felt invisible because of these different characteristics about myself and because of the value I perceived other people had about it, which, obviously fucking sucks. And if I'm totally honest, I didn't like those things about me. I thought that I felt undesirable because what I understood to be desirable was outside of me. And so it just felt like this never ending like hamster wheel. I just felt aware that I was in a race I couldn't win. Like that's what it felt like. And that just really sucked. I work in education, and which wasn't the plan. I was actually, I went into college pre-med, and I was pre-med my whole life until a class I took on Black history really changed the way I saw the world and myself and Black people. And it really propelled me to education because I was enraged. I could not believe I had to go through so many elite hoops and barriers. And like, I thought of it as like a double lottery. Like, not only did I have to like get into a really good school, I had to happen to choose to take the right class in order to access that knowledge. Like that just felt wild. And I wanted to sort of bring the knowledge back to kids who look like me back in New York City. And so that's what propelled my career into education. And I mention that because, that is why I came into education. I came into it wasn't a part of my life plan, and I recognized the power and the impact it had on me to realize that Black people everywhere, that the entire African diaspora has resisted the whole time. And it really shook me to recognize that I came from such powerful people, and that the only reason why I didn't know it is because of how the story was being written. But it had nothing to do with the truth. Again, that whole perception versus reality theme. And so I came into education with that goal. And so when I entered different schools and institutions and I saw many things that were out of alignment with that desire of mine. I'll put it like that. And I had to speak to it. I didn't know, and the thing is like, I didn't even want to speak with it to things. It's just that I couldn't sit and live with myself. Like, I was like, this is why I'm here. I couldn't endure these insane working conditions. For what reason? For what purpose? If not to change the world. And I repeatedly, time and time again, would say and do things to disrupt, to disrupt how things were, but all within the service of creating space and opportunity for Black and brown children to see themselves, right? And I just saw repeatedly how what adults projected onto Black and brown children, which again had nothing to do with the reality of what was possible for them, but I really saw how what adults projected onto kids really limited the reality of what was possible for them. And then use that as evidence to be like, see, they can't do it. And I spoke up in ways that I found different ways to speak up over time and in different contexts, because I also had to figure out how can I keep my job in those instances. But over time, I just started to, it just became so predictable. And I realized that I started to feel uneasy and unsafe in certain environments in education that just didn't believe certain things were possible for Black children. And that would never be said out loud. But I think that would be revealed in terms of the expectations for kids, or in terms of the narratives around that basically avoided a deep reflection on adult actions and choices and how they impact children. And I eventually started to feel uneasy in those spaces, particularly because it wasn't just about it being a toxic work culture. It was about, I felt like my soul was dying in these places. And I felt like my soul was dying, and I also so deeply believed that what I had in my mind was possible for Black children. And I just became aware that the environment was not it for it. And which is that was a major breakthrough and a major aha. And I'm literally real time thinking, wow, I'm amazed that I had that realization in that area of my life, and it didn't translate to other areas. But I understand that part of the reason why it didn't is because when it comes to an education, I have a very clear self-concept. I'm very clear about what I'm capable of, and I don't feel confused at all about what Black children can do, what I can do, I just have sharp, pristine clarity. And that clarity allowed me to figure out something's wrong with the environment. And I think that I've been able eventually, after all this, the reason for this podcast, I've been able to translate that into other areas of my life. And I know that it took time because that clear self-concept just wasn't there for a variety of reasons that I've been going into within and beyond this episode. But that is basically what propelled me to start my own business, because I thought to myself, I need to do this on my own or I'm out. I can't do it like this anymore. Within the context, so wait, what was the last thing? Right, so that's kind of how it's interesting just thinking about invisibility and hiding when it comes to my career. I realized that whenever I saw a different place, I think that clear self-concept played a huge role in my comfort with being seen even though I experienced a lot of like unease and even unsafety, when it got to that point, I was like, all right, I'm out, which is so fascinating. Oh my gosh. Like, within the context of the abusive relationship, I full on hiding, and because I felt so, oh, this actually flows beautifully. Like, I planned this, but I didn't plan it like this. It is great. But I felt so much like I was hiding and invisible because I felt, I was hiding from myself because I felt shame about who I was. Like, I felt shame about what I thought, what I was experiencing said about who I was. I felt shame about the disappointment and the judgment I put on myself for thinking I was a different person, but turning out I'm this person. I felt shame about that. And so in some ways I hid and became invisible to myself because that shame was unbearable. I also hid from my chosen family because of the shame about what I believed about who I was. I realized I don't think it was a conscious thought, but I didn't want to disappoint people. I didn't want to, what they thought of me to go down. I liked who I thought they thought I was. And I thought that this experience, the fact that I'm in it and the choices I make around it would have shattered what I thought my chosen family thought of me. And so I wanted to hide from that. I couldn't, the idea of how the people I chose and care about the most in the world think about me changing, that was just unbearable. So I just hid, which wasn't entirely conscious, but it just felt easier to hide. This is one of the reasons why it felt easier to hide. I also wanted to, and I did hide from my neighbors because, again, I felt shame about who they would think I was based off of what they could hear. My ex-wife, when she was violent, she would yell and be loud and slam doors. And one of my first thoughts is always, oh my gosh, did the neighbors hear that? It was like, I'm scared, which I had to suppress because it wasn't safe to demonstrate fear. And then immediately it was like, oh my God, the neighbors. I remember we were downstairs in the dining room that had a sliding open door and with the screen. So the door was open, but the door was open. And one time, out of nowhere, out of the blue, she looked at me with like this intense hatred in her eyes. Like I don't know if I felt more hurt or scared by the look in her eyes or by what she said, but she had this intense look. Of course she was drinking, and then she was like, I could literally punch you in the throat right now. And I just, even thinking about it, I feel myself shriek. I remember wanting to hide, wanting to be invisible, and so, but even more so than that, I was just panicked and preoccupied about like, did the neighbors hear, and I literally just never went outside, even though I love the sun, because I just didn't want to be seen. I just felt so ashamed about who I was and what people would think of that based off of what I was experiencing. And I think that, so that is how hiding was a manifestation of shame within the context of abuse. Now, hiding as a manifestation of surviving, that looked like me trying to take less space, make less noise, to change my schedule and my day around what I think her moods might be or whatever her plans were. To basically, like, the goal was to like not bother her or not trigger her, right? And this always felt like an impossible balance, because it was like I'm abandoning and avoiding, I'm abandoning her if I'm not around, but like I'm projecting all of my anxiety if I'm with her, or project like being afraid, right? There was just like no winning in that situation. But I really did try so hard to, like, I realized I used hiding different parts of me to try to survive in that context. Hiding also looked like having less needs and boundary and little to no boundaries, right? I think the needs part was huge, because it felt scary to have needs, because it felt like, wow, my needs could create a conflict, and my needs put me in the center of attention, and that is what I want to avoid at all costs. And also, like, my boundaries would do the same thing. So I just tried to have less needs and less boundaries to sort of survive and avoid violence. And, you know, perception versus reality. Having less needs didn't change the fact that I had needs. It just made them unmet, you know? And having less boundaries, quote unquote, didn't change the fact that I had boundaries. They were just being violated, you know? I recognize that now. It just, you know, time or whatever. Also, hiding was surviving. And so I used this as a strategy to survive as long as I could, until I literally couldn't shrink anymore. I think about the part of the circumstances around my last day, like the day that I left and it was done. It was literally like I didn't even want to leave. I just wanted sleep, and I couldn't hide that need. Like, I couldn't hide it. I would have stayed if she would have let me fucking sleep. But I think it was going on, I feel like 36, pushing 48 hours of like her nonstop, like, bender raging, and like I just wanted to sleep, and I couldn't hide that need anymore. You know, I felt delirious, and the hiding to survive worked until it didn't, because I just came down to, you know, I'm like human. Like, I have this need and it can't go anywhere. Then there is safety after hiding as safety after leaving. So after I left, it's actually surprisingly hard to hide your address on legal documents. And that became like a legit struggle. Like, I was hiding to stay safe after I left, because there were different things I needed to do legally to protect myself. And, you know, because we were married, or because she's listed in the court case, she has a right to have access to those documents. So hiding my address on legal documents, it became an actual struggle. Like, it was something I barely had the capacity for. One of my sisters helped me a lot with it. Also, that's when I leaned on like advocates from a local DV women's shelter, because it's just overwhelming, and it just really demonstrated to me like, wow, this system is literally designed to protect abusers and perpetrators, literally. But yeah, that's hiding after leaving for safety looked like doing everything in my power to hide my address on legal docs. It also meant like I really wasn't on social media before, but I was even more, now that I was like slowly reaching out to people, I was like even more hyper vigilant about having no social media presence, and like having no public information about my location. I was scared and I did not want her to know where I was. I did not know what she would do. And I needed to fiercely guard my location in ways that I'd never consciously thought of before. Like, people share locations so much and, post what they're doing in real time on social media. And that really wasn't, like, even though she was blocked and so were all her people, like, that still didn't, for someone so preoccupied about her safety, like, that just wasn't an option for me. It was also safety after hiding. It was interesting when I started to return to work and to return to my business. I had to disclose to some of the people that I was working with to sort of like help me hide, in the sense of, like, if I was in a place, if I traveled to work for work in a place where she may have been, I had to let the people around me know, like, hey, this is what's happening for me. My safety is a concern. Like, just as an FYI, like, I didn't necessarily say don't put me on Flint Street, but I did say, like, there's someone who is unsafe for me in this area and I don't want them to know where I am. So it's so interesting thinking about how, like, the relationship between safety and location and, like, all of the conversations it required. It's just a full-on task that it makes sense in retrospect, and it's not something I would have anticipated. And it's just really hard. Like, it made it really hard to feel safe in the world, knowing that I had to keep my location so closely guarded, but while also sharing it with people who have my back. I remember to this day, the last time I was in a place that she for sure knew I would be in was when I was presenting at a conference that had accepted my workshop while I was still with her. So she knew the date, the time, the location, and it was not probable that she would show up there, but it was still possible. And I just remember feeling so scared to go and present. I remember letting the hotel and also we were still married at the time. So, like, I had to tell the front desk, if someone asks for me, don't, like, even if they say they're married, like, because I have this situation going on. But yeah, honestly, what helped me get through it was two things. One was when I was setting up to present for my presentation, I was playing As by Stevie Wonder, which that song, it just makes me cry. It's because there's this one line where he belts out, don't you know you're loved by somebody? And it just, like, I was really, leaving helped me really discover that and accept it to be true, and to hear it in a Stevie Wonder song, just, like, affirming that. So that was one thing that helped me feel safe. And the second thing is I literally thought of all the people in my support group as, like, I would visualize them by the doors barricading them so that if she popped up, she couldn't come in. And that's what helped me feel psychologically safe enough to be able to show up and do this presentation, which was awesome, by the way. But yeah, so that's the safety. It was just like a weird nuance of, like, I'm hiding, but I'm not, and I need to not hide, but I do, to be safe, but also to thrive, to get to thrive. Yeah. And I will say now, this past year and a half has really taught me that, especially since I left, I've had some, like, my housing situation has been up and down throughout this time. I've moved so many times to so many different states for a variety of reasons that all trickle down to safety. And I realized that, and that was after I left her, but it's still sort of like a ripple effect consequence of all of the abuse. And something that this helped me realize is like, wow, there are different levels of safety and there are different types of safety. And that's not something I really understood or appreciated until I was in, one of the places I stayed was a 1-bedroom apartment in North Carolina. And I got there and it just occurred to me, oh my God, I feel safe. I can do whatever I want, whenever I want. No one who I'm afraid of or have concerns about or who would threaten my safety knows where I am. Like, I am just alone and free in this safe space, and only the people I care about know exactly where I am. Like, I just felt so safe. I felt so free and so safe, and that took literally 14 months to get to that place. And it was a physical place, but it was also like internally, I had to get to the place where I believed that I deserved to have a place like that, and that I deserved to come first in my own life. Because I still, even though I had physical safety from my ex-wife on paper, I still wasn't emotionally safe because I hadn't learned to be the priority in my own life yet. And so not being a priority in my own life, it just always invited a certain level of uncertainty, because as I was trying to rebuild my life, I had to learn how to let myself be first and believe that that was okay. And I had to identify and surrender the beliefs that got in the way of that. And that was just like a full-on journey. And so I think that inner journey helped, that inner work allowed me to create the outer world that supported my safety on all these levels. And I realized that, safety for me means, it doesn't only mean someone is threatening my physical safety or someone is yelling at me or throwing shit at me. Safety for me means having agency in the space I'm in. Safety for me means being free to move around my house without running into like intense emotional energy that's not mine. That's what safety is. And especially like that last part, like I think there was a part of it, just part of like my complicated relationship with my needs throughout my life. Part of me thought that last piece was a luxury, but it's actually a need and a necessity, and it's required for me to feel safe. And I just didn't know, because I literally never felt safe before until, what is this? This is June. Oh my God, this is July. I literally didn't know what that full safe feeling was until 3 months ago. So I forgive myself instantly, because like I didn't know the feeling, and therefore I didn't know what it required. But I was able to get to that place because I continued to be driven by my own inner peace, and I continued to be willing to surrender the thoughts, beliefs, feelings, and narratives that got in the way, which is really hard and scary, but it just is what it was. So which brings me to this point in my life now where which also led to I created the show in the midst of all of this, but the publishing of it, the recording and the publishing of the videos, this last relationship to hiding is what created it. And so now that I finally feel safe in ways I've never known or experienced in my life before, I feel safe enough to have a routine. I feel safe enough to not have a routine. I feel safe enough to go on long walks. I feel safe enough to listen to podcasts. And particularly, a few weeks ago, I felt safe enough to finally listen to this podcast episode about TV, which I wasn't looking forward to because I had a feeling it wouldn't be great, and it wasn't. It was awful. But I felt enough ease and safe. I felt enough ease and safety to listen to it because I had that strong self-concept. Finally, that's so exciting. Like the strong self-concept I talked to you about having within my career and in education and having clarity about what Black children need and deserve. I had that for myself in my own journey as a survivor, which it didn't exist literally 18 months ago. It was carved out, dug out of the valley, the mountain, all the things. But I felt safe enough to finally listen to it. And this is where I feel like the universe is like divine and doing its thing, because I listened to it and it was awful and it really pissed me off. And I was thinking, damn, it's not even the host that is pissing me off. It is society. How society talks about survivor stories, and like what society fixates on is so, I'll speak for myself. It feels so shame-inducing, and it also made it really easy for me to disidentify from the experience of violence and to be like, that's not me. And I know there are all these good intentions and stuff with helping survivors, but like, if the way we're talking about it causes people to distance themselves from even identifying what's going on, then how is that helpful? How is that being for survivors? You know, it has nothing to do with me or us or anyone who could relate to this lived experience. And I was just so fired up about it and realized like, this is divine timing, because it means like the world is ready for me. I am ready for me to step into this shit. And that was the moment where me hiding went from, safety to like self-suppression, because I have some shit to say and I am done watching the world and society run amok with how they talk about and regard survivors and their lived experiences. I was officially over that shit. And I was just over it. And I'm particularly over how the impact it has on survivors, right? I'm of the stance of, I'm not here to convince anybody of nothing, okay? If you don't believe that DV is real, or you don't believe survivors, I don't give a fuck. You're gonna believe what you wanna believe, and you're gonna choose evidence to support your beliefs. I'm not in the business of changing hearts. What I am here to do is, I don't like how the muck in society about DV and intimate partner violence, I'll speak for myself. I didn't like how I had internalized that, and I didn't appreciate the barriers it created in my own healing and accessing of safety and resources. Like, I legit did not reach out to help, to support groups, to advocates, to just different resources that help me literally be physically safe, because I didn't identify. I was like, that's not me. And it functioned to create more danger in my life because I was more isolated than I needed to be. I know and understand my own journey, the things I had to realize. I know and understand all of that shit. And what I am fired up about is how the thing that people in society think is helping is actually hurting. And I'm not going to those people in society to be different. I am going to us. I'm going to survivors to be like, hey, I'm not even saying that shit is crazy. I'm saying this is what it is. And I hope you can see any aspect. I hope me sharing what I found and saw in myself in this journey, I hope that helps you see you more clearly through the muck that society is slinging around. That's my only desire. And that's how, when I really connected to that, I realized hiding, because I am safe I know it. I believe in my ability to keep myself safe. And I am in a safe place as a result of the work that I've done and the choices I've made and the people who surround me. Like, I have safety on multiple levels in my life now. And so now I know that hiding is, for me, no longer about safety, but it's about suppressing my message. And I can't have it. I won't do it. Not anymore. And I didn't really do it for that long. Like, I really wasn't safe to do this until now. Like, if I had tried to force myself to do this, one, forcing is not living in integrity with my intention for this. And two, like, I just wasn't ready because I wasn't fully safe until very recently. And that is another thing I really sincerely hope that you take away from this, if you relate at all, is to, when you look back on your hiding, on the ways that you've hidden in your life, I hope that you look at it with non-judgment and with curiosity, right? Because what I've tried to demonstrate is that hiding serves its different function and purpose depending on what's going on in your life. It's not an objectively bad thing. It's not an objectively good thing, right? When I look at the way I used to carry a lot of shame for the ways I've hidden, especially since another thing society talks about survivors is like, tell someone, da 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 da. Like, it's not that simple and straightforward. And what I feel like it diminishes is the fact that someone's choice not to tell someone is a complicated, nuanced one. And I just think there's a lot of shoulding survivors on what they should do to be safe. And there isn't enough looking at the shit that we do, the choices we do make that do keep us alive, right? Like, I can now look back on my journey with like hiding and invisibility, and I can respect and honor my ability to survive because it fucking worked, because I'm fucking here. What? Okay? Also, it also helped release shame looking at it in this way, and that ultimately allowed me to find and really own my own power on my own terms. And that's the most important thing. Everyone has a perspective on like what survivors need to do, and none of it takes into consideration that part of this journey allows and also requires like the journey to being free and safe. And I'm still on that journey. I'm still learning it. Even as I said so many things in this show, I was like, damn, I need to like lead into this thing in my business more, this, that, or the other. But this is a journey about finding your own power on your own terms and no one else's. And that looks like whatever the hell it needs to look like. And it will stay stuck as long as the shame for and judgment for the choices you made remains. And I just want you to know, if you're watching this video, you deserve respect and honor, because at the end of the day, if you're watching this video, you're fucking alive, and everything that you have done up until this moment in time has allowed you to be alive. And I respect the shit out of it, and I sincerely hope you do too. Okay? Whew. That felt a little bit like a soapbox, so I'm gonna step down. But thank you for joining me in this unboxable episode of Full Out Healing. I'll see you tomorrow. And yeah, wow. Bye, y'all.